Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for joining this webinar this morning. I can see from the chat that we've got very good coverage from across the UK and Europe. So greetings from me, Frances Wood. I'm the Regional Director for the UK Government Science and Innovation Network covering Europe, and I'm based today in a very grey Berlin. I will introduce the panel and then go through how today's session will work. So I'm delighted that we are joined by Andrew McDonnell, who is a Senior Policy Manager at UK Research and Innovation. We have Joanna Westphal, who is a Policy Advisor at Universities UK International, and hopefully tech issues allowing, Christina Miller, who is the Director of the UK Research Office in Brussels, will join us shortly. So just to say that this is part of a series. So we've had a regular webinar series with Universities UK, with SIN, and with UKRI and UKRO. So we will have hopefully more of these on Horizon coming up over the next year, but also covering other topics that we think are of interest to the UK and Europe. So please do keep your eye out for future events. So just to say that we will keep the presentation quite short. We very much want to hear from you and your questions. Thank you to everybody who has submitted questions in advance. So we will make sure that we cover those. There is at the bottom of your screen, I think, an Ask a Question tab. So please, if you could put your questions into that, it just helps us make sure that we spot your question. We do have almost 650 of you online, so it'll be quite difficult to find questions in the chat. And if you have any sort of technical issues, please put that in the chat, and our support team from Universities UK will pick that up. Just to say that the slides will be circulated afterwards, and this is being recorded and will be uploaded to the University UK YouTube channel. So don't worry if you miss anything or sort of any links that are shared. They will be in the slides that you will get hopefully later today. And just a quick apologies from Peter Mason, who was the original chair of this session, and he unfortunately is off sick at the moment, so you have me instead. I hope that that is okay with everyone. We will endeavour to answer all of your questions, but some of them may be beyond us at the moment. So if there are any that we can't answer, we will follow up in writing. So Universities UK will write out to all participants and everyone who's registered. So don't worry if we can't answer all of your questions today. I can now see that we have Christina Miller on screen, so we now have a full panel. I will now just give a very quick overview of where we are on sort of Horizon Association, and then I will hand over to Andrew. So I'm sure that you're all aware of where we are in terms of association. So the UK has agreed to associate to Horizon Europe. This was negotiated as part of the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement that was agreed in December 2020. And the Commission published a very useful Q&A. So the link is in the slide, so you'll get that later, which essentially says that once that is in force, then we, the UK participants, will have the same rights as the EU participants, with a few very small exceptions. So this means that UK entities will be eligible for funding at the same rates and under the same conditions. They will be able to lead project consortia, and they will also count towards the minimum number of countries and calls for transnational projects. So clearly for the UK and for other countries in Horizon Europe, it's win-win to have the UK in. So just quickly on the current status of UK association to Horizon Europe. So whilst the UK has been ready since December 2020, we have not yet formally associated to Horizon Europe. We, as the UK government, see the delays being on the EU side. Our preference as the UK government is very much still association. There are a huge array of benefits for the UK research and innovation sector in association. but we cannot wait indefinitely, and so the government is preparing for all scenarios. It's worth just mentioning that the most recent guidance issued by the European Commission on the 17th of December confirmed, while the UK is awaiting a formal association, that it should be treated as an associated country. However, this is only useful to a point. So once UK applicants are successful and get to the point of grant signature, this is where there is a bit of an issue. It's great news that lots of UK applicants have been successful so far in Horizon Europe calls. And so in order to provide certainty to UK research and development sectors, the UK government has introduced and just extended a financial guarantee. So I'll now hand over to Andrew to explain what this is and how it works.
Thanks very much, Francis. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. I am here to speak about the UK Government Horizon Europe Guarantee, and I will go through some of the details here, and then there'll be space at the end for any questions that you ask. So if you have any questions as I'm going through, please just put it into the Ask a Question box below. So first announced on the 29th of November in 2021, we announced a guarantee for those who've successfully bid into Horizon Europe funded activities, and this was initially just for a first wave of calls. For those who were unable to sign the grant agreement with the EU because we'd not yet associated to the programme, we have recently, in the last month, expanded the scope of that guarantee to cover a second wave of calls, which covers everything up to everything with a estimated legal grant signature date of the end of this year, the end of 2022. The funding for this is being delivered through UKRI, and we have open funding routes to deliver most of the elements of the first wave of the funding guarantee. So EIT KICS, Pathfinder and Transition 2021 calls opened on the 21st of February. And that's opened on the Innovation Funding Service, which is a UKRI funding platform. And the ERC Starting Grants call opened on the 17th of March on GES, which is another UKRI funding platform. And if you want to see further details and guidance on any of this funding, you can view it at the link provided in the slides below, and these slides will be shared around after the talk. Next slide, please. So the important things for the guarantee is that we are trusting the evaluation processes of the EU for this. And since the applications will have been evaluated through the European Commission's peer review process, UKRI will be undertaking no further quality assessment or scientific evaluation of the applications. For both mono-beneficiary grants and multi-beneficiary grants, so mono-beneficiary grants like ERC grants or like Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships, or multi-beneficiary grants like the standard consortium style grants, this funding will be provided for the full lifetime of the grant, and it will be subject to UKRI terms and conditions. And the terms and conditions that the grant is specifically subject to will be provided during the application process. For funding routes for calls covered in the second wave, this process will open in May. For most of the calls covered in this scope, particularly for those of the consortium style calls, it will be covered via IFS, or the Innovation Funding Service, and it will be via an online form which will have a drop-down menu in which you can select the call that you've been specifically successful in. It will be a continually open call that will stay open from May. You can apply for the call that you have been successful in, and your call will enter into the system and be drawn from the system without the call closing. And for ERC and Marie Curie calls, the funding will be delivered through GES, and the calls will be open for each grant type individually. More detailed information for each of those calls will be provided closer to the time. Next slide, please, Francis. If you have any specific queries, there are a few help desks that you can contact. So For anything regarding the policy surrounding the guarantee, the scope of the guarantee, I would direct you to our policy dedicated inbox, which is eugrants.funding@ukri.org. If you are in the process of applying through the IFS system, there's a specific funding inbox for this, which is heguarantee@iuk.ukri.org. And if you are applying through the GES system, which currently works for the ERC starting grants, but will eventually be true as well for Marie Curie and the other ERC grants, you would contact the GES help desk, which is jes.help@ge-s.ukri.org. And for system queries related to GES, and for any policy related queries, you would be back to the original EU grants funding@ukri.org help desk. So next slide, please, Francis. I think that's my last slide. Yes, I will pass over to Christina Miller now to talk to you about UKRO.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm delighted to be here this morning. So I'm delighted to be helping organise these events. So I'm going to say a few words about what we're also doing in the same vein as where Andrew left off. So in terms of what help and support's available to the community. We are the UK Research Office. We're a small team based in Brussels, and we're a unique partnership between UK Research and Innovation and our subscribing organisations. So our core work is to provide a service to more than 140 subscribing organisations, primarily based in the UK, to help them with their European engagement, so participation in Horizon Europe in particular. A core part of that is making sure that we continue to provide advice and guidance on how to apply for the forthcoming calls, and also help guide successful projects through the grant preparation stage. Our services are delivered by a team of Brussels-based advisors, and we are part of UKRI's wider international team. So this includes the overseas offices based in China, India, and North America. We are also an integral part of the family of UK national contact points for Horizon Europe, and we specifically deliver the European Research Council and Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions help desks on behalf of the UK government. We work really closely with our counterparts here in Brussels from other countries, in particular the IGLU network, so an informal association of R&D offices based here in Brussels. And again, we're very happy to be contacted with any questions regarding UK participation, working in close collaboration with our colleagues in UK Research and Innovation, in BAYS, in the Science and Innovation Network, and helping provide a facilitation role to bring together research managers with policymakers. We continue to maintain a fact sheet on UK participation in Horizon Europe in particular, and there's more details available of that in the link. And really happy to be here today to help answer questions as part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Christina and Andrew for the presentation. I'm really pleased that we have a lot of questions, so I might just stop sharing the slides and we will move into the Q&A part. If all of the panel could have their cameras on, that would be great. Thank you. So there is a lot of questions, so I will get started. So I think the first question that has been upvoted, the extension of the UK government guarantee is of course welcome, but it only covers calls awarded in 2022. Coordinators are still looking for assurances from UK partners to enable them to participate in proposals being submitted to future calls. What assurances can we give? Thank you very much for that question, Catherine. I think we are at a difficult time because we have this uncertainty where we are ready as the UK to associate, but that hasn't yet been formalised. So that's why the guarantee has been extended to December, so that hopefully in the next few months we will formally associate, and then this will not be an issue anymore. However, I did briefly mention that there are, the UK government is preparing for all scenarios. So in a scenario where we cannot associate, there will be an element of that package that includes third country participation in Horizon Europe. So we can give assurances that whatever happens, there will be a mechanism for UK researchers and innovators to collaborate with their European partners. And I recognise that that raises a lot of questions. Exactly how will that work? When will that be clear? We're not yet in a position, because we are still trying to get our sort of plan A, which is a formal association to Horizon Europe. But I hope that that gives some reassurance. I don't know if Andrew or Christina would like to come in and add to that answer.
I don't think I could better what you've said, Francis. I think that's the most advice that we could give, that the guarantee lasts up until the end of 2022, or for grants that have their grant signature date up until the end of 2022. For grants that come after this, it is very much the case that we are relying on the government statement that researchers will be supported in all situations.
Thank you. The next popular question is, we have been successful in 2 Horizon calls. Congratulations, Isabel. We were then told that we have to change our status from beneficiary to associate partner. Can you confirm this is what we should do? Maybe Andrew?
Thanks very much, Francis. So our advice currently is to hold off for as long as possible. Obviously, we don't know when association could happen. So as long as it can be held off in the process, hold off and stay as a beneficiary. When you reach a point where you have to become an associated partner in order for the grant agreement process to progress, accept that, change the status of the UK partner to an associated partner, make any required changes that come from that. For example, it may involve reassigning certain parts of a coordinator role. And once that has been clarified, you proceed with the signing of the grant signature, which obviously as an associated partner, the UK participant would no longer do. But once that grant signature is signed, you can apply to the guarantee to receive funding for the UK participants component of that.
Thank you, Andrew. Christina, do you want to add anything to that answer?
Maybe just to add, thank you. That there will be, in some instances, deadlines that are issued as part of the letters that come from the project officer. I think it's really important to maintain a strong dialogue with the project officer throughout this process. We recognise that it might not be possible in every case to hold off signing the grant agreement, but to work with the rest of the consortia through this process. By changing to an associate partner at this stage, it's also really important to remember that the grant, the UK element of the grant, will be funded by the guarantee. And the list of the projects that are covered are identified on the pages that Andrew linked to. And should you have any questions about that, do make sure that you reach out to us through the email addresses that are provided. And then to work through what's required in terms of changing over to an associate partner, recognising that there isn't going to be a re-evaluation of the proposal, but there may need to be some adjustments that are made within the consortia. And again, if you have any challenges or difficulties throughout that process, it's really important to keep engaging with us through that and to have a dialogue.
Thank you, Christina. So the next question is, how will financial reporting work, both UK and EU? So maybe Christina, do you want to start with that one, or Andrew?
I'm happy to start. I'm happy to start off. So as an associated partner, you no longer have financial reporting requirements to the EU. However, you will have financial reporting requirements to UKRI. We will be the ones providing the funding at this point, and the financial reporting requirements will follow standard business as usual terms and conditions for UKRI, which will vary slightly depending on whether you've applied through the Innovation Funding Service or through GES. You will be paid 4 months in arrears, which is a slightly different system to the way that the EU system works. But I would encourage you, if you have any concerns, to get in touch with us. Most of these issues can be worked out practically, but the financial reporting is fairly light touch for the 4-month reporting in arrears. It's just providing receipts and timesheets, and then there will be a more thorough and formal financial report at the end of the project, which you'll be required to submit.
Thank you, Andrew. So the next question is, does funding under the guarantee programme require an institutional gender equality plan to be in place as the contract signature in Horizon Europe requires? I think most questions are going to be for you to start off, Andrew.
What I will say on this front is that this will be the requirements for the UKRI, the terms and conditions for UKRI funding are still being finalised. We'll share them as soon as they are available. It's based on the idea that if you have been judged eligible for an EU grant, you should have no issues in applying for the UKRI grant. It will follow the standard terms and conditions, business as usual, that you've seen for UKRI grants within your own institutions. I can't go too much into the specifics of what's required in terms of EDI, but if you want to send a query to the inbox, I can look into that more in detail for you. Christina, I think, can possibly provide more details.
Thank you. And I can add on the EU side. So EU member states and associated countries do indeed need to have the gender equality plans in place. It's something that we all need to bear in mind, that association can happen really quickly. So if you have questions regarding this, now's a good time to make sure that you do indeed have everything in place. But as Andrew said, this isn't something that's mandatory for associated partners on a project, or indeed to have the funding under under the UKRI guarantee.
Thank you. So we've got a very popular question. I'm just going back up. It's with 10 votes. So what is the situation with the MSCA PF fellows who've just been awarded European fellowships to go to the UK? Are they covered by the safety net?
They are covered. The postdoctoral fellowship is covered under the guarantee. It will be a GES grant. It will be one of the GES grants, and we are in the process at the moment of putting that grant together. So more information will be provided. We are very aware that there are additional concerns around postdoctoral fellows, such as visas and travelling to the UK. All of this is being looked at, and you will get communication. You'll get timely communication as soon as things have been finalised on those fronts.
Thank you, Andrew. But I think it is really important that the financial side is covered, which is the big.
Yes.
So it's just the sort of process side that needs to be finalised, but getting the money is the important thing.
You are guaranteed. You are covered by the guarantee. The money is there.
Thank you. So it says, so for projects in the gap now, will UK partners be transferred back to full partners via amendments and have the right to be coordinators again when the association finishes? So I think that's the question of sort of, once you start a project on UKRI terms and conditions, can you, when in a scenario where we then associate, can you move back off them?
Part of this is for the Commission to answer themselves. It's very much a Commission process as to what role they allow you to take in a project. What I will say is that any retroactive funding for participation in projects where you've already been funded by the guarantee and you might be moving your guarantee funding onto a project, that would require discussion between the UK and the Commission. So at the moment, our commitment is that you will be funded for the lifetime of your project through the guarantee. That will hold true no matter what happens. Anything other than that would require further discussions and negotiations once association happens. So I would encourage you to be reassured now that you are guaranteed for the lifetime of your project, whatever happens, and anything that comes to what your status would be post-association would be reliant on further discussions, and you'd be made aware of what was happening once that had been finalised. But your status is secure either way. It would never jeopardise your funding.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that also answers the next question from Dan around sort of ERC grants. So essentially the same thing of sort of in a scenario where we have associated, could you move off UKRI terms and conditions? I mean, I think just to say that this is a question that we've had in our previous webinar, and is something that I also hear quite a lot, and is something that BEIS, who are it's the ministry that leads on these discussions with the Commission for the UK, is talking to the Commission about, because this is something that we recognise that it's a lot easier within a project if you're all on the same terms and conditions. So this is, we recognise that this guarantee is not, it's not the ideal scenario, but it's the scenario that we're in where we can't yet formally associate, that provides as much certainty as we can. And I think, just to reiterate Andrew's point, that the funding is for the lifetime of the grant, so that you don't need to worry about that changing. So whatever scenario plays out in terms of association, non-association, that is there for the lifetime of your grant. And then the next question from Andrea is there any risk that UKRI will, following an, the questions move around sometimes when they get upvoted, so then I lose them. Sorry, I will find your question in a second. So can UKRI please prepare a demo video of how we can properly do the entries of the second wave in IFS? So just basically asking for more guidance, I think, Andrew.
So we are not currently preparing a demo video, but we will have essentially a screen-by-screen guidance with screenshots for how you apply at each stage. And I really should emphasize that the process has been stripped down to the simplest possible version. Anyone who's familiar with IFS from other applications that you've made to Innovate UK, it is not a standard IFS application. Most of it is uploading PDFs of your existing proposal. You won't be required to strip it apart and re-enter it. You won't have to worry about using alternative funding models or recalculating anything. You will be asked to submit a couple of PDFs of your original proposal, of the finalised signed grant agreement, and a justification for any changes in tasks and budget between the two if you have had tasks reassigned away from the UK partner. For example, if you were a coordinator and some of those tasks have to be taken by another partner. It is the simplest version you can imagine of an IFS application, and it's really just to get your grant into the system. So it will be much simpler than what you could be preparing yourself for. We will have a documented form of how to follow each step. The steps themselves are given guidance at the top that tells you exactly what you have to do, and we have revised it to a point where it gives you precise guidance, and it is written for people who have no experience of this system. So it will tell you what's required of you in each step. If upon releasing it, it is discovered that people are struggling to get through it, we will provide additional guidance, and we would be happy to make a video if that's required, and if it's possible, if any of us have the editing skills to do so. I'm sure I can find a comms person to help me on this one.
Cool, thank you, Andrew. Sorry, I have now found Andrew's question because it's been upvoted to the top. So is there any risk that UKRI will, following an application for guarantee funding by a UK organisation, where the organisation and application meets all the criteria, decline to offer guarantee funding because the UK is uninterested in the project?
I'll re-emphasise the point from the slide that UKRI are not performing any additional scientific evaluation on this. UKRI can never decline applications because we're uninterested in projects. We trust peer reviewers, and in this case, we are trusting the peer review of the European Commission. So when it comes into the process, we will not do any further evaluation. We will not align it to UKRI priorities. This is simply the guarantee to cover, if you have been successful in your EU project, that is enough for us. The only further checks that we will be performing is to see that the tasks that have been assigned to the UK partner have not significantly changed, and if they have changed, that they are justified and an equivalent budget for the new tasks has been provided. And then some financial checks to make sure that you as an organisation are legitimate, and really just the grant agreement preparation checks that the EU would have performed themselves.
Thank you, Andrew. There's a question here from Gary. When will the guarantee be extended to cover the partnerships? Clean Aviation Call is launched and there's planned to be grant agreements signed by the end of 2022.
So I can say again that we are actively in discussion around this. It's a point of discussion between UKRI and BAYS. We recognise that these calls are active. We know what the deadlines are. It is just a case of working out the background policy to it. I'm afraid I can't give you a specific deadline as to when they will be approved, but we will update you. We will update the guidance when any new calls are added to the list, and we will provide, if you follow the UKRI Twitter account, we will tweet each time that the guarantee gets updated.
Thank you. And then there's a question here about sort of funding. So can you confirm whether UKRI grant will cover the same project duration, which I think you've answered already, which is about the entirety of the project, but there's a specific thing here about a delay in processing the grant. So that UKRI can take 30 to 90 days to process grants. And so there might be some then potentially cash flow problems at the beginning. I think you've already said, Andrew, that there is a difference between the EU terms and conditions that can pay in advance and UKRI, which I think you said was 4 months in arrears. So is there anything here in terms of sort of helping organisations with cash flow, particularly at the beginning of a project?
What I would encourage is to accept that, or to recognise rather, that the UKRI process for the second wave will start in the middle of May. So either the middle of May or when your grant agreement signature is signed, whichever happens first, you'll need to leave between 30 to 90 days for the UKRI process to complete. If you can alter the start date of your grant so that after grant signature is signed, you leave at least 30 to 90 days before it starts, it will be a lot easier for the UK partners to start at the same time as everyone else with funding confirmed and in place. Otherwise, you might need to have some discussions about how the UK partner is going to align, because we do, as Francis has said before, we acknowledge this isn't the ideal system, but the guarantee is here as the best alternative, and we do need that time to process your part of the application and to make sure that your claim is legitimate. So I would encourage you to try and line up starting dates with this extra 30 to 90 day buffer. Get all the documents in as soon as possible, get everything into the system. We will be prioritising grants based on when we receive them and also when your grant signature date is, so that we try and get things out the door that have come in, that have the earliest grant signature date. And yeah, just communicate this as much as you can with your consortia to make sure that everyone's aware of what the UK situation is, and see if you can possibly rearrange things to accommodate this extra time.
Thank you. I mean, this is, just to repeat, that this isn't sort of the situation that we wanted to be in. We have been ready since December 2020 as the UK to sign. There were processes on the EU side that needed to be agreed, like the regulations for Horizon Europe, which happened in May. So this is, we're essentially providing this safety net to try and get us to the point where we formally associate. But we do recognise that this provides quite a lot of difficulties for individual consortia. So the next question, what is the funding model for UKRI guaranteed funding? Is it direct costs plus 25% indirect, like Horizon Europe, or the 80 to 100% full economic cost, like some UKRI grants?
We are not recalculating your funding model. We're just using the funding model that you've applied for via your EU grant. So you get 100% of the value of the grant that you have requested from the EU, taking into account exchange rates and any change in the tasks allocated to the UK participant. So you don't need to worry about recalculating funding models or moving things into a new budget table or anything. We will use the budget table provided in your EU application. And although we will need you to put numbers into the system, it is the lightest touch you can imagine. It's usually just absolute top level figures for the columns. And beyond that, internally, we will use your original proposal.
Thank you. You just mentioned exchange rates. So I think I did see a question in the chat about that. Is there anything more you can say about how that be calculated, and what rate or at what point you will calculate that?
There is an exchange rate provided in the guidance. I wish that I could rhyme it off from memory, but there's an exchange rate based on averages provided in the guidance online. That will be calculated when you are submitting your application, so it won't be calculated live over the course of the grant. You'll calculate your value in pounds, convert your value in euros to your value in pounds, and you'll then just work with your value in pounds for the duration of your grant. I should say that there is a condition in the guidance for fluctuation. This is legal cover in the event of extreme fluctuation of exchange rates. So you shouldn't necessarily expect fluctuation in exchange rates to affect the value of your grant. You should expect it to be converted into pounds at the beginning of your grant application process, and then to just use the value that you have in pounds. So you don't need to worry about using conservative exchange rates and keeping funding back at the end of the project. It will just be your value in pounds profiled across your full grant.
Thank you. The next question from Rafael: will there be deadlines for the guarantee programme application for those who were awarded EU grants?
By which you mean, I'm aware that I can't ask Frances for further specification. She's just reading out a question, but there will be no specific deadlines for the Wave 2 calls. For the Wave 1 calls, we do have opening and closing dates for the grant, just because of the nature of how these calls work. They have to open and close. Our intention is, it's not like normal calls where you have a limited window of opportunity. We would ask you to submit within those windows if you can. If you can't, get in touch with us and explain the situation. We're not trying to not fund anyone. It's really just because of the way the system works. Once the second wave process opens in May, that will be a continual process that is always open from that point on. And we will process your calls, process your grants as they are submitted. There will be no deadline for you to aim for. For the calls that fall under JES, such as Marie Curie and ERC, there will be windows in which those calls are open, but there'll be quite generous windows. And if for whatever reason you can't make those windows, let us know, because once those calls are closed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be covered. We will, in this situation, we will adapt the system to make sure that everyone is covered. No grant left behind.
Thank you, Andrew. I mean, I think, you know, what I'm taking from everything you said is that UKRI is trying as much as possible within sort of constraints to be flexible, to make this as light touch and easy and as open, because we recognise that this isn't the ideal situation to be in. So trying to adapt the rules, but there are just some rules that we can't adapt or that we have to have sort of in place. But I think I would recommend reading the UKRI guidance and also sort of using the email address that Andrew has mentioned, which will be in the slides that will be circulated later. So I think there's another question here about UKRI terms and conditions and the difference with the EU ones. So we've already talked about sort of payment in advance versus arrears. Are there other major differences? I don't know, Christina, if you want to start with that one.
Thank you. I think from our side, the main point is for everybody who's signed up to the grant agreement, they will continue under the EU terms and conditions. So as set out in their grant agreement. For the UK partners, as Andrew indicated, they will be subject to the terms and conditions under the UKRI funding. So so in this sense, for the rest of the consortium, no change applies. So it's continuation of business as usual. And for the UK side, they will have all of the details in the terms and conditions of the UKRI grant. I don't know if there was any particular points, Andrew, it would be helpful to elaborate on here.
I'm slightly limited on what I can say here because we haven't finalised the terms and conditions for the Wave 2 calls yet. We are currently in the process of sending the draft terms and conditions out to some kind of chosen readers to ensure that everything makes sense for everyone. So we are finalising them now. They will be released as soon as we have them. They are very much based on business as usual terms and conditions from UKRI, so either UKRI terms and conditions for JES calls and Innovate UK terms for IFS. They're not intended to trip you up in any way, and I think it could generally be said that there's a slightly you're slightly freer in what you do at an institutional level with the UKRI terms and conditions. So you should have enough freedom within these to copy what you were planning to do under EU terms and conditions. There are reporting requirements. Obviously, there's financial checks, but those will be made clear to you via your monitoring officer. If everyone in an IFS grant will be assigned a monitoring officer that will speak to you, but you should expect them to be equivalent to or less demanding generally than you were expecting under the EU grant.
Thank you. So obviously they're still draft, but I think just to sort of pick out that maybe then the big possible negative difference between the two is around the sort of funding in advance versus arrears. Yes,
I understand if the EU offers pre-financing for grants, whereas UKRI funds in arrears. Again, this is related to the fact that the guarantee is not intended as was not the first choice. Obviously, the first choice was association. We have to work within the restrictions of UKRI systems and UKRI funds 4 months in arrears. What I would say is if you have something in your project that you are worried about, if your first budget, you feel like you're going to struggle to cover it, speak to your monitoring officer when you start the project, because this does happen within UKRI projects and there are ways to work around this that make it work for everyone. There's ways to line up invoices and payments in such a way that the money never needs to leave your bank account before it's received from UKRI. So I would encourage you to speak to your monitoring officer once you're registered and work something out.
So I think there was a follow-up question from Kevin who asked that in the chat about not being familiar with the sort of standard terms and conditions. So I don't know whether when we send the slides round, whether it's possible to have links to the standard terms and conditions just to sort of check, even though the draft ones for this will be slightly different. But I think just to reassure, because there does seem to be a lot of questions here about this.
Yeah. We can certainly add the standard terms and conditions to the slides.
Cool, thank you. So I think there's a question here from Catherine about changes between the proposal and final grant agreement. So that is possible under the sort of commission process. So will people applying for the guarantee have this sort of final agreement budgets rather than the original proposal if there's a difference between the two?
We are using the proposed budget as a soft cap for the amount that the UK receives. So the amount that you requested in your original proposal is the upper limits of what UK partners can receive from the UK guarantee. If the tasks assigned to the UK partners have reduced between the original proposal and the final grant agreement, then we'll need to look at that budget and see whether it's still justified, and we will ask you to submit a revised budget for the tasks that are now assigned to you. But if your tasks haven't changed, then we would just process it using the budget amounts in the original proposal, comparing it to the final grant agreement to confirm that that's still the case.
Cool. Thank you. So the next question is from Robin about UK researchers being kicked out of successional consortia because the guarantee is not sufficiently robust. I will maybe take this and then hand over to Christina. So this is also something that a lot of my teams across Europe are also hearing. So my teams are speaking to individual governments and research funders to essentially explain the UK position, our status, whilst we're waiting for formal association and also the guarantee. This is partly why this second wave of the guarantee has been extended to December to provide a bit of longer term certainty. But it is definitely something that we are also hearing and are worried about. If you have specific examples, please do get in touch with the emails that we will circulate later. It is really helpful for us to have specific examples. We can then refer to them in discussions between BEIS and the Commission, because this shouldn't be happening whilst we're in this waiting position to formalise association. But Christina, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Frances. Like you, we've been working with our counterparts across the EU to spread information regarding the guarantee and what this means to help provide that additional reassurance. Where we have come across issues, so where issues have been flagged to us, again, in a similar way, we've been liaising closely with BEIS to make sure that BEIS, as our ministry, is aware of this, so that the specific cases can be taken in discussion with the Commission. But also, we're happy to talk to national contact points, as our other national contact points across the UK, with national contact points from other countries to help explain the process, and indeed to talk through with coordinators. Once grants are funded, and I don't know if Andrew would like to say a word about this, they can also receive a letter from UKRI stating that they would be able to receive the funding of the guarantee to help provide any additional reassurance that's needed.
Yeah, just to say on that point, I would encourage, if you are asked by your project officer to provide a letter, to start first by just submitting the guarantee itself and pointing out that your call is covered. The letters that we provide really can't say much more than the guarantee itself is, that it just restates the guarantee. If it is absolutely required by the project officer, we will provide it. But I would encourage you to try first by just submitting the guarantee and saying, here is my call, it is covered, here is the text of it that explains what the process is, and that essentially guarantees the UK participants funding under the set conditions. We can provide a letter if it's required, but it will essentially just say the same thing.
Cool, thank you both. I think that partly answers the next question about project officers asking consortium leads to make decisions in April, and if this isn't open until May, there's the sort of the timing challenge here. So is there anything more that you could say on that?
Yeah, to get back to people on that, I would say that the UKRI process will only start after the grant agreement has been signed. So the cover for the guarantee should be the important thing that you need to get back to the project officer with, to say that you are eligible for funding from the UKRI guarantee, but it's really irrelevant whether the process starts before your grant ends, because you can't begin the UKRI process until you have a finalised grant agreement. So you need to communicate to the project officer that you are covered, and that once the final grant agreement is signed, you will submit that to the UKRI process along with the original proposal, and they will provide the funding and use the guarantee guidance document to show that this process is in place. We're currently working with BEIS to communicate this to the EU as well, to make sure that that message is spread. as much as possible through the project officers. But if you want to communicate this as well, to say that this is the setup that's been provided, and then once the process actually starts, you submit all of your documents, and that happens after the grant agreement is signed. The challenge then is, as I said, about this 30-day period, and also any gap between your grant agreement being signed and the call opening in mid-May. That is something that will have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. It might involve delaying the start of the project. It might involve rearranging when the UK partner begins in the project. And I acknowledge that that's not ideal, but unfortunately, it's just the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. But it does mean that when the UKRI process begins, doesn't prevent you from finalising your grant agreement with the EU, because you need that finalised grant agreement to begin the UKRI process anyway.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we still have a lot of questions that we haven't yet answered. So don't worry, we'll make sure that these are captured, and the panel and Universities UK will look through them and sort of provide answers where we can afterwards. So please don't worry if we've not got round to your question yet, but I will keep going through. And there's a question here about understanding as an associate partner, we signed the consortium agreement and not the grant agreement. So Andrew, do you want to just clarify that?
Yes, that is true. Yes, I could answer that one by nodding. Okay. Yes, as an associated partner, you link formally to a beneficiary on the grant. So as an associated partner, you are linked to one of the beneficiaries of the grant, and they essentially take on responsibility for ensuring that your tasks are provided and that your activities are reported upon. And you sign the consortium agreement where you formalise that agreement. The text of the consortium agreement is entirely up to consortiums themselves. There's DESCA guidance that you can reference for this. And we do provide in our guidance some indication of what you should look at. If you look at the last Q&A question, there's a guidance of some of the points you should look at in your consortium agreement. But yes, essentially, you don't sign the grant agreement, you do sign the consortium agreement.
Thank you. So next question is for about 2021 Horizon Europe CSA calls. I heard that the UK guarantee will not be systematic, but based on case-by-case evaluation. Can you give us more insight on which 2021 CSA calls will be eligible for the guarantee?
It's not a case-by-case evaluation at all. It's very much just based on the deadline date of grant signature. The important thing to remember is that the guarantee for mono-beneficiary calls, the guarantee applies regardless. For multi-beneficiary calls, the guarantee requires that your EU grant is still eligible. So the guarantee will pay for the value of the UK partners component of the budget, but fundamentally it's the EU's decision whether a grant remains eligible or not. So if a UK partner becoming an associated country means the grant no longer meets the minimum eligibility requirements, that's something that you have to solve at a consortium level in discussions with the PO and with the head of the consortium. What I will say is that in the communications we've seen so far, the EU has been very flexible on this and has allowed people the possibility to change things around to make their consortium eligible if the UK partner leaving has prevented that from happening. So I would encourage you to speak to your project officer, but we can't change the eligibility, the EU's eligibility rules. We can only fund UK participants as associated partners.
Thank you. And there's another question about how amendments in project budget will work during the project implementation.
So this would work in the way that you amend grants normally under UKRI terms and conditions, which is obviously within the flexibility of UKRI terms and conditions, you can make some changes without formally requesting it. Any major changes, you would get in contact with your funder for JES calls or with your monitoring officer for IFS calls, very similar to the way that you would contact your project officer. and just check with them that the changes are appropriate and that they agree that they are required and that they still fit the original remit of the grant.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and then I will just go round the panel and also bring Joanna in to see any sort of final thoughts from the panel. But the last question, is it possible to use the UK guarantee for a Horizon Europe grant we want to transfer into the UK as a part of appointing a new member of staff? For example, if the UK was not part of the successful ERC application, but the PI is now in the process of moving to a UK organisation and wants to bring the grant to the UK.
I will say that we are currently discussing this particular issue, so I can't provide you an answer on it now, but we will have guidance one way or the other soon. It is something that is on our radar. We're aware that it happens, and we know that we need to take a policy position on it, but we do not have one established yet. So we will update the guidance soon with an answer to that question. Sorry, I can't provide it today.
Thank you. I think it is a really good question, and one we've also had before, so it very much is on our radar. So Joanna, I don't know if you want to say anything from a Universities UK perspective before we wrap up.
Thank you, Francis. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Francis, Andrew, and Christina for coming in and answering all these very technical questions today. I hope they have provided useful answers to everyone who attended today. Just from UKI's perspective, to reiterate that our clear stance is to associate to Horizon Europe, and we're doing everything we can to do this as quickly as possible. This is also why you may have seen that UKI is a founding partner of the Stick to Science campaign. So we're doing everything in our power while also preparing in the most robust way possible in case association does not happen. Andrew, I just wanted to say thank you for reiterating that there's no reevaluation of the calls. I think that was really important, and that has come out in a couple of questions today as well. This has come out in conversations with members a lot. So thank you for reiterating that. We do understand that this is a really tricky time for everyone and presents immense challenges, and it's not an ideal time. So if you do have any issues or are facing challenges, please feel free to contact us at UKI as well. As Francis mentioned earlier, specific examples are always really, really helpful. So we can work closely with government to resolve these and address these issues. So that's all from my point of view. Thank you again for answering these very technical questions.
Thank you. I'm conscious we're at time, but I will just turn to Christina and Andrew just for any final thoughts before we wrap up. So Christina.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you again for inviting us along and for working with us to organise the event today. I would like to just re-emphasise the point that for all applications that are going into the calls that are forthcoming, do continue to apply as an associated country. So we are on the list as per the Commission guidance as a to be associated country. So it's really important that you continue applying on this basis, and any changes that may need to be made, if we haven't associated by the time you sign the grant agreement, they would be made at that point in time. So just keep applying as an associated country. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andrew.
Thanks very much. I'll continue Christina's point to say as a beneficiary from an associated country, because people do occasionally confuse associated country and associated partner, and they are very different things. So you want to be a beneficiary on the grant. And I will say to everyone, please do keep checking the guidance. We update it regularly. We'll add more Q&As based on the questions that you ask. Common questions will be answered there. I would thoroughly encourage you to read it. We are delighted to answer your questions in the EU info inbox, but we are a small team, so it can take us a little bit of time to get back to people. If you can find your answer in the guidance, excellent. If not, then do please get in touch with us. It's useful for us to know all the questions. It's how we are alerted to policy considerations that we need to take into account as well. So, and also just a huge thank you as well to everyone who's contacted us and aided us in this process as well. We owe a lot to all of the research offices and researchers across the UK who've been very collaborative with us.
Thank you. And just one final point from me is just to re-emphasise that the UK government preference is association, and that is what we're working towards. So hopefully soon the guarantee won't be necessary. It is here as a financial safety net. So just to repeat that the slides will be circulated along with the link in case you want to listen to any of our answers. With your questions, we will sort of follow them up afterwards. So, but it might, as Andrew said, there's quite a small team, so it might just take us a week or two to respond to you on those. Please do look at the guidance in the meantime. Thank you very much for all of your excellent questions and for sticking with us for the whole hour. I hope you all have a good rest of the day, and thank you very much indeed.